Okay, so we should be live now, and I think Facebook will catch up with us. My experience tells me as soon as I click that button, we're on. So Judith, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to introduce you to everybody who is watching in just a moment, but for those of you who don't know, my name is Kate Wakelin and I'm from Neuroendocrine Cancer Australia, and I'm the NET patient support nurse for people affected by neuroendocrine cancers around Australia. So just before we begin this broadcast properly, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm broadcasting to you from, which is the land of the Wurundjeri people, and just paying respects to elders past, present and emerging. And what I always say is that, because it continues to be a thing that I am deeply grateful for, especially as Melbourne is locked down in coronavirus mayhem, is that I live very close to the Yarra River, which in language is called Birrawong, and I take great joy in running along that river as many times during the week as I'm able to. So I'm grateful for where I am joining you from today. So just before we cross to Judith, just a very brief, I mentioned coronavirus, and certainly if you're in Victoria and particularly Melbourne, you will be having this all over your news that we've had quite a significant spike. We've been in lockdown for a couple of weeks and we're just really waiting for those numbers to start plateauing. And the last couple of days it hasn't increased, so we're just all crossing our fingers. I think the thing that I'm noticing, I went for a run last night and every person I saw was wearing a mask, which is the advice if you're in metropolitan Melbourne and the Mitchell Shire. So I think Melburnians they've spent about 5 minutes whinging about that, and then they've gone, okay, well, what's the most stylish, colourful, interesting, quirky mask I can find, and I'm going to rock that. So I saw some really beautiful masks. So if you're in Melbourne or you've decided to wear a mask to help prevent the spread of the virus, if you've got a quirky one, I saw some really cool unicorns on a mask this week in the Facebook group, but post your photos. It would be lovely to see. And look, there's not any real further advice except for wash your hands, social distancing, wear a mask if you're vulnerable or if it's hard to socially distance. That's absolutely the advice that's coming through. There's information on the Cancer Council website about mask wearing for people with cancer, and I've posted to that numerous times. So without further ado, I'm very grateful to Judith Lacey for joining us. Judith is an associate professor and head of supportive care in integrative oncology from Chris O'Brien Lifehouse. And a few weeks ago, I actually had a question from someone who I know is viewing this video right now. And it seemed like a really simple question about medical cannabis. And I thought, I could do a Facebook Friday focus on that. Let me do some reading and make sure I'm up to date with my information. And then my brain just started to explode because it's actually really quite complex. And I am so grateful to Judith, because Judith is a renowned expert on this topic, and I'm sure she'll be able to help address lots of the questions that I have too about this area that is very much of interest in our community of people with neuroendocrine cancer. So welcome, Judith, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for catching me. We had a bit of a slip up initially, but I'm here and really happy to talk about this topic. Yeah, I'm learning, as all experts in medicinal cannabis, particularly in Australia. We're all quite new at this, and our expertise is developing over time. So my expertise has developed over the last few years and is still developing. So there's a lot of things I don't have the answer for.
Well, look, we're looking forward to hearing you share what you do know, and also, we'll be interested to see what the areas of research are too, and what spaces we should be watching for further developments as time goes on. But I wondered if we could just start in a very general way by if you could explain medicinal cannabis, because I understand there's more than one product. And so can you tell us a bit about this and what's available, if that's possible, and what the differences are?
So when we talk about medicinal cannabis, we're talking about a herbal medicine that's been around for centuries, developed, it's a species of plants. There's over 700 different varieties of cannabis, and each plant and variety has multiple potentially medicinal properties within it. So we talk about the medicinal properties of these plants, we talk about the cannabinoids. So there's 144 at least known cannabinoids in the cannabis plants as well, all in various ratios depending on the plant and the variety. And then there are the terpenes that give cannabis its smell. So that's the smell like well, the weed, the smell that you're used to smelling at those music festivals, but it's the smell of pine or lavender, and there are a lot of different terpenes that give all plants their smell, and they have potential medicinal properties as well. And then there are the flavonoids and other components of the plant, so over 300 different parts of the plant that work together and separately, but more we're very interested in the together, the entourage effect, to have a medicinal, to work as a medicine to improve symptoms in patients, in people really. And so that's cannabis. So it's not just THC, it's not just CBD, it's THC, CBD, CBDA, THCA, CBN, CBG, TC, there's a lot, and then all the different terpenes. And so we look at how we simplify that to turn it into something that we can work with in a medicinal space. And so we will often talk about the ratio of THC and CBD. So you'll often hear it simplified as to the two main cannabinoids that have known medicinal properties, which are THC, which is the component that is psychoactive and makes you feel stoned, and also is great for pain and appetite, and CBD, which you hear as not being psychoactive and as being very useful in epilepsy and anxiety and face creams and everything else. And so cannabis is quite nuanced, but it is a herbal medicine. When you look at cannabis as a medicine, and what we're currently using it for in Australia, despite there being a huge variety out there of very nuanced ways of prescribing cannabis, you want something that helps you sleep, improves your appetite, but doesn't make you feel agitated, then you'd pick one strain versus another. In Australia, we don't necessarily have that choice as yet. And so we use either Australian developed and grown cannabis products that are TGA approved to be used as medicinal products, or imported products, and both. And we have access to quite a few, and we really simplify it to the amount of THC and CBD and maybe one or two other cannabinoids.
So now I understand why I was so confused, if that makes any sense at all, because I started to go down this rabbit hole and got completely bamboozled. Maybe a dumb question, Judith. Does that mean there's lots of different varieties of marijuana? And or is it more that these are the compounds that are...
Lots of different varieties. I was just thinking, you know, if there are some beautiful slideshows that I show showing a map of the world and the different varieties that grow with different civilizations. So you've heard of Afghani Kush and the Indian hemp and different products. And it's the different strains grow in different areas, and people have developed them in different ways. So there's many different varieties, different strains, and different percentages in a particular plant of the cannabinoids in different ratios with different terpenes. So it's quite a nuanced space.
And I'm jumping ahead to some questions that I was going to ask you later on, and maybe we'll come back to it. But that would seem then that making, because this has come up, making your own medicinal cannabis products, there'd be quite a bit of variation depending on which particular plant your oil is being created from. Would that be a reasonable?
Absolutely. So if you have some, so if you live in Canberra and you have some seeds and you plant them, you will plant a cannabis product that may or may not treat your symptoms.
Depending on what compounds are in that plant.
Depends on what works for you.
Okay. Oh, that's really helpful for me, and I'm sure it's helpful for other people. I'm just going to have a look at the comments and see. I can see that lots of people are watching us, and heaps of comments. So I may not be able to respond to all of the questions that come through on the live feed, because I can see there's just gazillions of them. This was very popular when I talked about it with the group that we had you coming along. Everyone was very pleased.
Yeah. And the other important thing that I will say about cannabis is that from the 80s, we realized that we have something called an endocannabinoid system. So humans have within their body receptors that respond to cannabis, exogenous cannabis. So we have receptors in our brain, throughout our immune system, throughout all the tissues of our body that bind to cannabis that's provided externally, like opioids. You have opioid receptors, you have cannabinoid receptors, but we also produce our own naturally occurring endocannabinoids. And their role, they're neurotransmitters, and their role is to keep your body in homeostasis or in balance. And so you may have heard of anandamide or 2-AG are the most common ones. And some people, and we really don't understand yet what the complexity of that, what that actually means to purely in therapeutic processes, but we're always measuring endocannabinoid levels to say, well, maybe depression or anxiety may be related to an endocannabinoid imbalance, maybe exercise increases natural, not just endorphins, but endocannabinoids. So these are all the nuanced, this makes it make more sense as to why cannabis works so well as a medicine. If it is that there are receptors in our body that bind to it, but they also are used to put your body back into a sense of balance and homeostasis.
Oh, that is so interesting. And I am learning so much, Judith. So I imagine you'd be thinking about, as researchers, ways of, stimulating or regulating the body's own production of their endocannabinoids. And I didn't know how to say that word before this day. So again, I'm deeply appreciative. I'm just wondering then, with knowing that there's a variety of different compounds and products, who are they and what is it used for, and particularly around cancer?
So I'm going to simplify it now because I think that makes life easier. And I don't know who the audience is. I'm assuming they're all patients or carers. Is that mainly with rare neuroendocrine cancers?
Right.
So in the cancer space, we're looking at cannabis in improving appetite. We know that a lot of people, anorexia or loss of appetite is a really common symptom in people with cancer, and it accompanies sometimes weight loss. Cannabis helps improve, we think, and we're still doing the research. There's a lot of research. We're involved in a big research trial here in New South Wales looking at refractory anorexia in cancer. We know that for people who may or may not have used cannabis or had cannabis recreationally in their life, it gives people something called the munchies, where it makes food, makes you hungry, and also makes things that you wouldn't normally eat taste good. It's called an orexigenic. So in cancer, that's a really helpful thing to crave food that you don't normally want, that you really can't stomach, and be more hungry. So that's a really important symptom. The second one, and we don't have a great solution to that in cancer care, the second is difficult to control nausea. Now, difficult to control nausea during chemotherapy is a study that, for example, Peter Grimmerson's study that was run here at Lifehouse and around New South Wales, sponsored by New South Wales Health, showed a positive result for cannabis as a anti-nausea on top of other anti-nauseant treatments when their nausea isn't responding, and that's using THC and CBD, those two main cannabinoids. So for difficult to control nausea related to chemotherapy when everything else hasn't worked, in addition to, not instead of. The other is nausea related to the cancer itself, called refractory nausea, when nothing else has helped. And this is the indication we're commonly prescribing for. We know nausea can be an incredibly difficult symptom for cancer patients. The other symptom that it's very commonly used in the cancer space is difficult to control pain. So pain that is refractory to other medications. So that is, we know that a lot of people get chronic complex joint pain related to some treatments, or very difficult to control nerve pain, or chronic complex pain after being on treatments for a long time that may cause symptoms, and that opioids and anti-neuropathic agents, anti-inflammatories, are treating it but not getting rid of the symptoms, and that's called refractory pain, and that's where cannabis has a role as well. And so they're the main indications. And then there's recent studies looking at sleep disturbances. Our research was in people with brain cancers, GBM, stage 4, and the tolerability and the benefit in improving quality of life in brain cancer patients, and showed an incredibly significant improvement in sleep. And that's also some of the insomnia studies are looking at cannabis for sleep disturbances, not first line. We can't use it first line in Australia. And so there's quite a few indications, and of course anxiety and chronic complex symptoms related to that. And that's and what we find in most cancer patients is they actually have clusters of symptoms. So they don't just have one symptom, they'll have often a collection of symptoms. So you may have pain, sleep disturbance, loss of appetite, nausea. And so if you can imagine, instead of taking 6 different drugs for that, you had one that treated all of that. And that's where cannabis is in a very interesting place in cancer care. And
Judith, just sort of reading along with what you're saying to me, that depending on the sort of symptom would then determine the I might be wrong about this, but like the blend of THC and CBD. Okay.
And so, because we have availability of some products, and it's growing all the time with the nuanced prescribing, you know, Australia's in a very interesting place because they've left it to doctors to prescribe. And every other country in the world, you know, the doctor says, yes, you should have cannabis, and go off to a dispensary of people that talk cannabis all their life. So we're doing catch up to work out, understand.
So the effectiveness of the cannabis product that a person is prescribed might also depend not only on their sensitivity to the product, but the knowledge of the doctor in which sort of blend to be prescribing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's really challenging on so many levels. Can you tell me, Judith, what we don't use it for, what it's been shown to not be useful for?
I don't think it's very good for diarrhea. It's quite good for bowel symptoms, so I'm going to take that back. What is it not useful for? We don't know what it's not useful for at the moment. We know what we can't prescribe it for yet, and that is the cancer itself. We can't prescribe it for that because there's not enough evidence to say that it slows cancer in any way. A lot of research in that space, so it's not able to be prescribed for controlling the cancer per se. There's no evidence to suggest that. Our brain cancer is the most studied, and you know, we're one of the big studies, and now the next part of our study will be looking at does it slow down recurrence in high-grade brain cancers. But you know, there's nothing in the literature that suggests that it does, so you can't prescribe it for that. And similarly, pancreatic cancer, there's studies at the moment looking at pancreatic cancer and cannabis, and does it have an anti-cancer effect? And those studies are mainly being done in mice at the moment. So is there something we can't use it for? I don't know the answer to that. There's a lot we can't prescribe it for, but I don't know. I think it's a very understudied medicine. So imagine in the 1880s when it was first brought to England from India, a guy called William O'Shaughnessy brought it to England and tried it, and went into all the pharmaceutical, the pharmaceutical companies put it onto their pharmacopoeia. It was a prescribed medication for menorrhagia, for pregnancy-related nausea, for migraines, for bowel disturbances. It's been used in IBD a lot. It was used for chronic pain, is to reduce opioid dependency, for anxiety, and even used for psychosis. Then in the 1930s, it became a banned substance in America, and associated potentially also with communism, and a bit of an interesting time in the 1930s when it was banned and became a banned product, so an unstudied product, until a guy called Raphael Moshalem, who from Israel, started studying it and really looked at finding out what is it about cannabis that has potential medicinal properties. So we're about 100 years behind, and we're playing catch up to know what it can be used for and what it can't be used for. So the answer is what it can't be. I don't know the answer.
So it's a watch this space thing. Judith, I imagine to do a clinical trial on something, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too far because I know we don't really know the answers, but usually when someone's doing a clinical trial, they have a bit of a gut feeling that this might be useful in this application. Can you tell me about the research? I know I've jumped right ahead through my plan of questions, but we'll loop back. But in terms of the research projects that are currently happening, tell me about the basis for the gut feelings that are behind those research projects being dreamed up in the first place.
Now, Australia is quite different from other countries because as it becomes a recreational drug, research, the impacts on the research abilities and getting money for research. It also, in America, for example, they can't study all cannabis products. We're far more flexible in Australia, and Australia is actually starting to lead the way in research as well as Israel in this space, and Canada's up there too. When it comes to research in Australia, what we're really putting a lot of effort into is looking at symptoms in people with difficult to control symptoms in cancer. And so money is being, so I'm, for example, involved in a big New South Wales health observational study and looking at 600 patients who will be prescribed cannabis for difficult symptoms in the advanced cancer space. That's one space they've put money into, put money in kids with epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, sleep disturbances. These are all funded studies. Parkinson's disease, Tourette syndrome. Then looking at dementia. There's a lot of work in cannabis and Alzheimer's, and dementia, not just in symptom management, but also the impact it may have. Rheumatoid arthritis, chronic pain, and in the cancer space, obviously, anorexia and chemo-induced nausea and vomiting. They're all studies that are being funded and running. I think there's 56 or something studies at the moment. There's quite a few studies. There's also a lot of drug, these are pharmaceutical products really. So the companies are like drug companies and pharma, and they're looking at an observational study of looking at who is being prescribed cannabis or using cannabis, and the therapeutic use is a large, 20,000 patient cohort, and studying, collecting the data, understanding what's going on. A lot of studies in animals and in mice, and looking at the impact on the tumour itself, and looking at what it does and doesn't do. And then there's the impact on driving, because that's a big issue, is that you can't drive when you're taking cannabis if it's got THC in it. And so the impact on driving then becomes a big, and so you need to invest in working out how to study that safely. So this is if you look at PubMed, for example, you look at what's actually happening, the studies are going like this. Research in cannabis is, Parkinson's disease, research, it's just rapidly changing. Does that answer your question? It's like everything.
I knew it was
questions and not enough answers.
But it's very encouraging to hear, given that we know so little, that it's really encouraging to hear that the studies are out there. And but you did just touch on a topic that I know came up a couple of times in the questions that people asked, which was, just before I ask, I'm going to ask about driving, but someone just put a comment on our little live feed, and I don't know what the terminology is that person's referring to, so I'm going to put it to you. So this person said CBD or FECO.
I don't know what FECO is.
Okay, maybe it's a typo. Anyway, that's all right. Driving. So with prescribed, obviously, does it depend on the blend, or is driving? Can you drive at all when you're prescribed any of these?
I think what the discussion is at the moment is if CBD becomes over the counter, pure CBD with less than 0.2 or something percent THC.
So that's those who've joined us partway through the broadcast. That's the component that doesn't have the psychoactive
yes.
properties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything that has any THC in it can be picked up in the very crude testing that they do alongside the breathalyzers, which is the tongue scraping, and it can pick up. Cannabis is very lipid. It's very well bound to the fats in your body. It stays around for days, but we usually say about 3 days it's in your system after you've used it, THC, that they can pick it up in that test. Some say it's up to 5 days. The impact on your driving, we think, is probably 4 to 8 hours, depending on the person and the product. So that's the work that's being done by the Lambert Institute and Ian McGregor's group, looking at how long does it impair your driving for and what's the impairment that people have, and then how do you develop more nuanced testing that actually picks up impairment rather than presence. So at the moment, if you're prescribed cannabis with THC and you're picked up there, you do not have a legal leg to stand on.
Okay. And what about, is it possible to get...
No one can protect you for that.
Okay. Well, that's good to have clarified. Can you get pure CBD?
Yes.
So that's prescribable. And so people who are on that product, do they need to worry about driving?
They do question why they're being prescribed pure CBD and if it fits their symptoms that are difficult to control and if it improves their symptom management. But at the moment, the test is for THC.
Okay. So that's really, really useful. Thank you. Someone else asked about, well, we're talking about considerations for maybe who needs to be taking particular care and the things they need to keep in mind. And certainly driving was a common one. But the other one that someone asked was about liver function tests. Can you tell me if we know, if someone has impaired liver function because they've got tumours, which a lot of our patients have liver tumours and their liver function, you look at those bloods and they are looking pretty wacky. Are there any guidelines or things that we know about prescribing for those patients? Because they're also the ones who are having nausea and vomiting and appetite loss and pain and anxiety and trouble sleeping, and like all of the people I'm thinking of who would fit the criteria for prescribing medical cannabis might also be the people with a liver full of tumours. So can you comment on that?
Yeah, it is challenging because cannabis, obviously can take it in multiple different ways. So you can smoke it, it bypasses your liver. You don't want to smoke something, you'd rather vaporize it, which also bypasses the liver metabolism somewhat. It is metabolized through the liver, through the cytochrome P450 system. More CBD than THC actually. So it's the CBD that you think CBD isn't great for nausea. You really want to find the right product for the right person. If you have it absorbed under the tongue, so there are some products that are nanoparticle based and so go straight into the bloodstream. It bypasses the liver, the first pass metabolism by the liver more than if you swallow it and it goes through the liver more. So ingested cannabis goes through the liver a little bit more. And it depends on the dose. So in our study, for example, we excluded people with significantly abnormal liver function tests, but most people with cancer don't have normal liver function tests. And we're also using very, very small doses. So I am considered a homeopathic prescriber or microdosing because people don't want to feel stoned, they just want to feel the effect. So it's very small doses. We know in big doses, particularly CBD, which is used in kids with epilepsy. An example of a kid with epilepsy may be on 600 milligrams of CBD a day. And when I prescribe for nausea, I'm prescribing probably the equivalent of 2 milligrams or 3 milligrams of CBD and THC 3 times a day, so less than 10 milligrams a day. So that impacts on the toxicity of the liver. So it's not liver toxic, but it does go through the liver, and definitely it can affect the metabolism of some medications that are also processed through the cytochrome P450 system, particularly high-dose CBD, which you think is benign, but it's actually not as. So you have to be careful.
So what medications does it affect?
Sorry?
Can you give some examples of other medications that it affects?
So the example is a study in kids with epilepsy who had big doses of CBD, and they showed that it slowed the breakdown of clobazam, one of the anti-epileptics that's commonly prescribed, and that hung around for longer, and they're wondering if that, and then potential for toxicity from the clobazam level being high, but also maybe it helped with the epilepsy. So it's uncertain. So I generally say in my cancer patients, just use the smallest dose that you need and use it under your tongue. And it's risk versus benefit when you're looking at people with advanced cancer with disease in their liver.
Yeah.
Most of our drugs go through the liver. Most of our painkillers go through the liver to some extent. Most of our anti-nauseants. So it's something that we think about all the time, and it's balancing.
Okay. So if someone's taking, I keep my
I'm not going to give you a direct answer to that because we don't say liver dysfunction, can't take cannabis.
Yeah.
Disease in the liver, can't take cannabis. It's, watch, just be careful.
Yeah. Okay. Can I ask Judith, if my mind always goes back to the collection of patients, all who live in Canberra, might I add, who are sourcing and creating their own cannabis products. They would all be through the liver, wouldn't they? They would all be metabolized through the liver because they're oral. Or actually, some people are vaping, so that's anyway.
Well, most of the oil
under the tongue.
When I prescribe, for example, it's under the tongue. Some of it's absorbed straight into the bloodstream, and some of it's absorbed through the liver.
Okay. Thank you.
Not a big consideration; it's a consideration.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so I wanted to go on to the area of cost and availability. So who can prescribe this, and also how much does it cost?
Which state are we talking to?
Well, we've got people from all over Australia, right from Carpentaria right down to the bottom of Tasmania.
Hello, everyone. State dependent. So mostly any doctor can prescribe cannabis, some nurse practitioners according to the state. So I'm not an authorised prescriber, and I just prescribe using the TGA national form, which is an online form that any doctor can use to prescribe. So GP, definitely.
Okay.
They need support letters from specialists for some often, particularly, chronic pain patient. You want to make sure that somebody's symptoms are really, you've tried everything, and this is, that next step. So I'm a specialist, so I've already seen people who've tried everything else and they're seeing me, so that makes it slightly easier for me, but I'm only one person with a full clinic, so it's very hard. So every GP and some nurse practitioners, cost. The cost depends on the product, but the average cost is for a bottle of cannabis from the Australian companies, it's a bit less than $200 for a bottle that may last anywhere from a month to 3 months, depending on the dose. If you use the nano spray, it's more expensive, but you may need less. So anywhere from $200 average for a bottle of 50 or 60 mils to $400, $600. So, for example, a kid with epilepsy that uses 600 milligrams and I'm prescribing less than 10 milligrams a day, you go through a lot of bottles compared to someone who's having 10 milligrams average a day, which is 1 ml. That one bottle of 50 mils will last almost 2 months. So it depends on the person and their dose. So that's with regard to cost.
Thank you.
It's becoming more affordable, and the market's very competitive.
And is there any hope on the horizon for prescription benefit scheme to pick up some of the tab for this?
Interesting, the Dust Diseases Board is actually picking up the tab for some patients. Some private funds are picking up the tab for some parts of it. I think it's a lot of the PBS, until we do the research, until we get these studies done, it's going to take a long time until this is on the PBS, except for some indications. So indications like multiple sclerosis and Sativex, which is registered as a script, or I think the work with epilepsy with kids with Dravet syndrome and other syndromes, I think it will become a script PBS drug sooner. But some of the other products will take a while, so don't hold your breath for that one. But you can lobby your health funds and for other support.
Okay, so if you are being treated privately, it's worthwhile having a conversation with your private health fund to see what they could do.
Look, it doesn't hurt, does it? And I think the other thing is that it's important to participate in trials, because that will help us, the whole field, move forward.
And that was my next question. So you've read my mind perfectly, which is what I would expect from an integrative medicine specialist. You very intuitive. And so how would people find information if they're in, I don't know, Dubbo or Colac or, Western Australia? How would they find information about clinical trials?
So New South Wales Health on their website for cannabis has the trials listed for cannabis trials that are open and available. So our study is for, we're in regional sites called CARE New South Wales, and that's on the website for New South Wales Health. And I think the TGA also lists the cannabis trials that are available, but I'm not sure. So each local health area on their, each state has its own listing of the trials that they're offering.
Okay, so I might try and find some of that information and post that in the comments.
I haven't seen anything for neuroendocrine cancer.
I beg your pardon.
I haven't seen anything specifically for neuroendocrine tumours. It's more for symptoms related to.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. So that our patients won't necessarily be excluded if they've got the symptoms that the trial is looking at particularly. Yeah. Can I ask, you mentioned before about diarrhea or irritable bowel syndrome, Judith. A lot of our patients get carcinoid syndrome, which involves a lot of diarrhea. Has there been any, I don't think there's been any research, if I'm reading you correctly from what you've said, but do you have a gut feeling? Does it cause constipation? Is that what you've been alluding to?
It often, sometimes causes diarrhea.
Oh, okay.
So you have to be careful. It's oil-based. So if an oil-based product may cause diarrhea, there's a work by a researcher, gastroenterologist in Israel, Naftali, I think is the surname, on irritable bowel, inflammatory bowel syndrome. So Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. Can you extrapolate that data to carcinoid? Don't know. Good study to see that shows that it relieves a THC CBD product. I think they were using inhaled because it doesn't have the oil and bypasses the liver a little bit, improves symptoms related to inflammatory bowel disease. I don't know if there's any work on carcinoid symptoms, but, observational studies are very interesting.
And I'm looking at my comments feed to say, well, tell us your experiences.
It's oil, but it's an oil. And a lot of the stuff you can, through the PBS, through the TGA, not the PBS, you can get an inhaled product, but I don't know if you can get the vaporizer legally. So that's always interesting. You don't want people rolling joints because that's not good dosing. There's a new metered doser that's going to be coming out to Australia, which you put your symptoms in and you inhale the amount that you need for those symptoms on the day. And that could be really interesting for people with bowel symptoms, for example.
Oh, well, that's a fascinating space to be watching. Judith, you touched on we were talking about people who might be thinking of smoking a joint, and I know a lot of people in Canberra are creating their own oils. Two questions, and the first one's not necessarily related to finding non-prescribed cannabis product. It's about something that's flown out of my brain, so I'll come back to that. But can you just give us some general guidance? Like, what would be the considerations to be bearing in mind if you are thinking that the cost is prohibitive, but you would like to try making your own? What sort of things should people be mindful of?
Mindful of, there's a lot of charlatans out there. I mean, there are a lot of people that always prey on vulnerable patients. And working in integrative oncology, my background is as a palliative care specialist, and so I've been working in cancer care for a long time. We also know that people with medicinal cannabis and Rick Simpson oil and this cannabis will cure my cancer, just pay $20,000 and your cancer will go away. There are those people out there. So when you talk about cost, there's cost and there's cost either way. So number one is think about what people are selling you and why, where the evidence is and what they're providing. The advantage of a medicinal product, which I always think should be the place that people go to and should talk to their GPs about it, is that it's screened for heavy metals, for pesticides. It's standardised. You know how many milligrams per mil of what you're getting. You know every constituent. It's passed regulatory tests. You're not putting toxins into your body. And we don't know how people grow cannabis externally and if they're using pesticides, not using pesticides, if the one product is the same as the next, if there are heavy metals in the soil or not. So all of those considerations, it's a balance. As with anything you eat, we've got a very controlled fruit and vegetable market, and that's because of heavy metals and toxins and environmental toxins you don't want to add to cannabis as a plant. And so that's one part, and making sure that you get what you paid for with. If you are looking outside, and I know of some of the people that do produce very good quality cannabis products with good services that some of my patients swear by, but you have to source that yourself. Yeah.
Thank you. Judith, the question I was going to ask has come back to me, which is fortunate. A lot of our patients have pancreatic insufficiency. So sometimes that's because they've had their pancreas removed, or their pancreas has got tumour and it's not working effectively, or sometimes that they're taking somatostatin analogues, which is reducing the amount of pancreatic enzymes the pancreas produces. And so they have often fat malabsorption resulting in steatorrhea. So really horrible smelly poo, and we've talked about that a lot in our Facebook support group. But we know that for those patients, when they have anything oily or fatty, it just goes straight through them. So I'm imagining for those patients, if we're talking oil-based, if they've got that issue, then we would be thinking more about the under the tongue or vape kind of.
So there's a new So there are new products coming out all the time. For example, there's a CBD melt that is now being produced. There's a company that's doing a nano spray, a spray under the tongue for those patients. The oil, depends on the dose, If you've got a very small dose of oil and you take extra creon with it and you have it with some food in your stomach, it may not cause diarrhea, but as the dose increases, you're getting more oil. And it's either in a coconut oil or a hemp oil or an olive oil. And if you know that just goes straight through you, even the tiniest drop, an oil-based product is probably not worthwhile for you. It's a rapidly developing space. There are patches for cannabis. It's changing. And so you do need to be mindful of the oil content in your body. Some people can adjust honestly with their extra enzymes, but some people really can't.
Yeah. Okay. So that's superbly helpful. So thank you so much. Judith, it's such an evolving space. I'm wondering if I could put you on the spot um, and invite you back to our Facebook group in about 12 months' time, if you would be happy to consider, and we can certainly have this conversation offline, but whether you might be happy to consider coming back in a year or so and just giving us a bit of an update about where all of this research is at.
Yeah, I'd be really happy to. I find it, I'm learning all the time, so I'll have more things to share. You just have to send me reminders, obviously. Sorry I was so late today. I'm horribly apologise for that. That you found me. I think it's always happy to share knowledge, and there's a lot of, we are also running a series through Lifehouse called Living Well with Cancer, and a webinar series that's open to the public, and I'm happy to share that with you as well. And our next one will be on exercise and cancer, so you guys can listen to that. But we will be doing one on cannabis soon, and hopefully I'll get my endocannabinoid expert on that. So we can also, if you want to, be in touch and share other things that are going on in this space for people who are interested. They're very welcome. They're all free and can check in and learn more outside of the support group as well.
Fantastic. That would be brilliant. And if you could, you know, if we could arrange for me to get those resources, I'm really happy to feed them back into the community. Judith, you talked about your full waiting room, and I know you've got patients who are about to arrive through your door, so we'll let you go, and you've been so generous with your time. But just imagining that to see you as a doctor, you would have to be a patient of the Lifehouse, the Chris O'Brien Lifehouse. Is that correct?
You need to be a patient of New South Wales, and telehealth makes that far more flexible. Right. But the wait list, you need to have a referral, and you don't need to be a patient of New South Wales. You need to be able to provide all the information to me and contact our department in the living room at lh.org.au and send a referral. But the wait list, 6 to 8 weeks, but I'm available. But there's only one of me. And I'd always recommend, talk to your GP about it first. And I'm happy to support GPs in prescribing, because once I prescribe, then I have to see you again and again. And so that impacts on long-term ability to fit other people in. So,
and are there other integrative specialists such as yourself in other locations?
In cancer care, it's a growing field. There aren't that many doctors that are working in cancer care at the moment. I'm looking for people to come and train with me and do work with me. But in the States and in most countries, it's a rapidly developing space.
Well, maybe we'll look forward to it. Maybe there'll be some more news on the horizon about that in 12 months' time too. Look, Judith, thank you so much. I know that I'm going to press the stop button and everyone's going to go, you didn't ask my question about this, or you didn't ask my, and I will think, I'll be kicking myself because there'll be things that I'll think of asking too. But I guess we can always tuck those questions away, and I'll be able to provide some more information about some of those.
And once we get our webinar set up, I'll send you the link, or you can hassle me to remind me to be sent the link. But if you go onto our website on the Lifehouse website, My Lifehouse, and go into the Living Room at Home program, we're going to be posting reminders or on Twitter or whatever when they come up. So follow us and you'll find links all the time. I'm always sharing stuff on cannabis.
Thank you so much, and been incredibly generous. So, Judith, I'll let you press the little red button to make sure that you answer your patients. Thank you so much. We so appreciate your time. And I'm not going to take too much of your time either, because I know Judith has been incredibly generous, but we have been online for ages, so you're probably all exhausted and starving. But just a couple of really quick little housekeeping kind of the plug, this is now what I do. Just the first thing is a reminder about the Getting Results study. So this is looking at scans and getting results and things like the gap between the scan and getting the results and the form in which those results come to you. It's an area that we know that a lot of people struggle with, and we're very keen to get data about it. We did put up a little plug on our Facebook and social media today. it's not a quick survey. Like, it's not, oh, this will take 5 minutes of your time. It's really sort of about 15 to 30 minutes. So we know it's a bit of an ask to ask people to take part in that. But I think the data that we're going to get is going to feed into national guidelines for health professionals. So we're really keen to get as solid data as we can. So I'm going to stick a little link to that in the notes. We've had 35 people around Australia. There's about 1,200 people in our Facebook group. So I reckon we can get a few more. I'd love to see your comments and your feedback. We've already learned so much by looking at the comments that people have put in so far. So thank you if you're one of the people who've already done that survey. The other thing, just to let you know, I'm not going to talk any more about news because this week we've got an e-newsletter coming out. So just a reminder, if you don't get our e-newsletter, you can sign up to that on our website, which is neuroendocrine.org.au. You just scroll down to the bottom of that homepage, and there's a little box that you can put your email address into, and that will ensure that the e-newsletter comes to you. If you have subscribed and you don't think you're receiving it, you might be like me, where my computer is extremely protective and thinks that I get more spam than I actually do. After I'd been working with Neuroendocrine Cancer Australia for an embarrassing amount of time, I looked in my spam folder and realised there was a lot of e-newsletters that had never come into my inbox. So if you think you've subscribed, you're not seeming to get them, maybe check in your spam box, is Kate's tip. Look, I'm going to leave it there. It's been lovely to have you all join. I know that this was a much awaited topic, and I hope it's been helpful for you. I'll put lots of links in the notes when I get to them. It's going to take me a little while to sift through all of the information today, so bear with me on that. But yeah, great to see you all, and I hope you all take care, have a good weekend, and if you're in Melbourne, rock your mask. All right, everybody, take care.